Do you guys watching remember Android tablets? Well, apparently Google doesn't. Let's get into this. Recently, it was announced that with the new version of Android, Android P, which of course the biggest yet to come feature we don't know about is just what it's going to be named. That's all really you have to look forward to. Will not be supporting any Android tablets. In fact, Google had been selling one for a long time just called the Pixel C. Apparently, I read up that the Pixel C was originally supposed to run Chrome OS, and then at the last minute, they decided to swap it with Android just so they could say that Google makes tablets as well, just like Apple does, right? Well, not anymore. The Pixelbook is still, of course, running Chrome OS, which is very separate from Android. Chrome OS is getting more capable at running Android apps, but definitely not the same platform. So since this new generation of Android is not going to be supported on not just the Pixel C, but also anything in the Nexus lineup. So now, phones that were being sold 2 years ago, like the Nexus 6P and the Nexus 5X, they're already out of their support run. What's interesting about this, and if you're an Apple fan and you don't really care about this sort of thing, there is still something you can take away from this. The interesting thing to me is that this is not entirely on Google. I mean, ultimately, they allowed to partner with Qualcomm and let Qualcomm make a lot of hardware decisions for themselves, but it turns out that Qualcomm has very little interest in trying to make long-term support for processors that are getting older. What this means is they are not supporting their older devices with newer drivers. The reason I bring this up is just because iPhones recently got under a lot of hate because of older phones like the iPhone 6 or the iPhone 6S, when running iOS 11, get a certain amount of down throttling. That way they can last a little bit longer. Their battery lives won't die before they get to 0%. And Apple goes back even further with iOS 11 support because they've designed their own A series of chips, which means that they can continue supplying drivers, supplying updates for phones that are pushing 5 years old now. The first iPhone to have a fingerprint sensor in it can still run today's most modern version of iOS. Of course, they do get down throttled, but it at least shows that Apple cares about those old phones and wants to make sure they last longer. Whereas companies like Qualcomm and Google now showing off that with new versions of Android not being able to support older processors. We want you to buy new phones. If you want new features, you're going to have to upgrade again. If you bought into the Nexus lineup, which at least when I tried the 6P, I thought the whole scheme of it was these were Google phones. Both hardware, software optimized together. And what at least I thought was kind of interesting about the Nexus lineup was that they were really good phones at a budget price point. We don't have that anymore with the Pixel lineup. Now you have things like the Pixelbook, which are Chromebooks with unbelievably high specs, despite it running Chrome OS, which means that you're paying $1,000 plus for a browser. And now, of course, we have the Pixel phone, which a lot of people like for certain hardware exclusives, but turns out most of it is software. After all, the portrait mode bokeh effects on the Pixel 2, those are machine learning. That's not anything special about the camera. Lack of wireless charging, not including headphones, making fun of Apple for removing the headphone jack, then doing it themselves. But hey, you got that squeeze feature. This is why I have a hard time buying into that Google ecosystem. You know, recently we were just talking about the Apple ecosystem, and a lot of people were bringing up that Google has a much more open and wide ecosystem with a lot more options. I'm not really sure if Google has a good track record of showing long-term support for products you buy into, especially if you decided to buy an Android tablet at one point. So if by ecosystem you mean smartphone, I mean, there's not really any Google-made laptops or desktops that actually have high-end processing power on them, other than the fact that they run Google Chrome, which in my mind, you don't compare that to the Surface Book. You do not compare that to MacBooks. It's night and day. They're totally different products. They have totally different functions. You know, just because a $1,000 Chromebook can run Adobe Lightroom, that doesn't make it a professional device compared to what Mac OS and Windows 10 is capable of running. So you don't really have laptops and desktops. Android Wear is dead. You've completely backed out of the smartwatch market, and now they're completely backing out of the tablet market and now saying, well, Pixelbook is all you need for a tablet, right? Google tablets starting at $1,000. Or you could head over to Apple, you know, and pick up a pretty decent iPad for about $300. What world are we living in? We've gotten to the point now where Apple is the budget option? I thought Google was the company about being cheap and having more options, having a diverse ecosystem. All of Google's services you guys love to bring up, whether it be Google Photos, Google Play Music, Google Play Movies, the Google Home app, all of those services, they're available on iOS, which is likely why more people are buying into that. It's why you're not seeing very high sales numbers for the Pixel. So in terms of Google ecosystem, what you really have is the Pixel and some speakers. that are pretty good. I'll give credit where credit is due. The Home Max is a decent product when it's not killing your Wi-Fi. But overall, that's really the ecosystem Google has right now. Pixel, the smartphone, and a couple of speakers. That's not an ecosystem to me, especially when we're comparing it to Apple's supporting record processing power on both the A10X chip and soon to see the A11X chip this June. An octa-core processor made by Apple. That thing is going to slay in the Geekbench scores. We're already seeing things like the iPhone 10 outscore phones that have yet to come out with the Snapdragon 845. iPhone 10 is 5 months old now and it's beating all of them because Apple is a company that focused on longevity and making sure that while our products are not always the cheapest, unless we're talking about tablets, they're going to last the longest. And we're going to keep pushing updates to phones that are 4 years old just so that they last longer. Whereas you buy into Google's ecosystem when you see something like the Nexus and go, ooh, Google designed this hardware and software inside and out. 2 years later, gone. No more support, no more updates. You're on your own now. You're not even going to get driver updates from Qualcomm. Whereas a lot of charts recently are saying that if you buy an Apple product now, it's most likely going to be working just fine and get software updates from Apple at least for another 4 years. Definitely not half of that. I find this really embarrassing. And when you're looking at a company's future and you're looking at an ecosystem to buy into, talk about walled gardens, really think about this example of how they tried to build up this Nexus lineup between the Nexus 6P, 5X, movie players, or the Pixel C tablet and try to tell you that, well, Android will get better, Android will improve, this lineup is great, it's only going to expand from here, only to see its creator completely shut down the entire thing, take over it themselves, and just slap a new name on it like Pixel and say, oh, no, this is different. To me, that's just very, very annoying. I don't like to see companies do that. I rarely see Apple do anything like that. But of course, I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about this. Probably a good counter argument you guys could use against me is, well, Android doesn't really have a lot of massive updates anyway. Most Android phones are not running the latest version of Android, so what difference does it make if they don't get updates from Google? Perhaps the less Google interferes with the product, the better off it is. And if that's the case, why are you buying Android? Buying it hoping that the creator of it doesn't do anything with it? I don't know. It's up to you guys. Let me know all of that good stuff in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.